The sound of a mine collapse isn't a boom. It isn't an explosion. It's a sigh, a deep terrestrial exhale, like the earth itself is tired of holding its breath. Silas heard it before. He felt it, that low-frequency vibration that rattles your teeth before the sound even hits your ears. He looked up at the roof-bolt steel rods, meant to hold up 1,000,000 tons of rock, and watched them shear off like matchsticks. In that split second, amidst the flying dust and the screaming metal, Silas didn't think about pain. He only thought about the rookie standing 5 feet away and the promise he'd made to the boy's mother just that morning. The alarm clock on the nightstand didn't ring. It clicked, a soft, mechanical sound that signaled the end of rest and the beginning of another day in McDowell County. It was 3:45 in the morning. Outside, the world was pitch black, a heavy darkness that seemed to drape over the hollows and hills of West Virginia like a wet wool blanket. Inside the small frame house, the air was still cool, smelling faintly of old timber and the potpourri his wife, Martha, kept in the hallway. Silas Vance sat up. His joints popped, a symphony of friction and age. At 52, Silas was made of more scar tissue than skin. His knees were worn down from years of crawling on the gob pile, and his back carried a permanent ache, a reminder of the low ceilings in the number 4 seam. He didn't complain about it. Pain was just part of the uniform, as essential as the hard hat or the methanometer clipped to his belt. He moved to the kitchen in the dark, navigating by memory. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't want to wake Martha. She needed her sleep. The coffee pot was already prepped, just needing the button pressed. As the machine hissed and gurgled, Silas stared out the window above the sink. There was nothing to see but his own reflection in the glass of face, etched with lines of coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove. It was tattooed into the pores, a permanent shadow around his eyes. He drank his coffee black. It was bitter, hot, and necessary. He packed his lunch pail, a bologna sandwich on white bread, an apple, and a thermos of water. Simple fuel for a complicated job. He put on his boots, lacing them tight. They were heavy, steel-toed leather boots that had walked more miles underground than they ever had on the surface. He grabbed his keys and stepped out into the humid morning air. The drive to the mine was a ritual in itself. The roads wound through the mountains like snakes, tight turns and steep drops that demanded attention. But Silas drove them on autopilot. His mind was already at the face, thinking about the cut they needed to make today, thinking about the quota. The price of coal was down, the pressure from corporate was up, and the mountain was being stubborn. It was a trifecta of stress that sat on his shoulders as he steered his truck through the fog. He pulled into the gravel lot of the Black Bear mine. The towering tipple loomed against the graying sky, a mechanical beast that never slept. Shift-chanted air here smelled different. It smelled of sulfur, diesel fumes, and damp earth. It was the smell of industry, the smell of a paycheck. Men were moving in the half-light, shadows with lunch pails. "Morning, Silas," a voice called out. It was heavy with sleep, but friendly. "Morning, Red," Silas grunted back, nodding to the mechanic working on a man. He walked into the bathhouse. This was the transition zone, the place where men became miners. The locker room was loud, with the sound of metal doors banging and men joking, a forced cheerfulness to ward off the anxiety that everyone felt but no one admitted. Silas stripped off his street clothes and pulled on his gray stripes, the reflective coveralls that made him visible in the abyss. Then he saw him, the kid, Tully. He was sitting on a bench, looking at his helmet like it was an alien artifact. Tully was 20 years old, fresh out of high school, with hands that were still too soft and eyes that were still too bright. It was his second week. Silas had known Tully's father, a good man who died of the lung 10 years back. Silas had promised to keep an eye on the boy. Looking at him now, Silas felt a pang of worry. The mine wasn't a place for soft hands. "Boots on, Tully," Silas said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We ain't getting paid to sit." Tully jumped, startled. "Yes, sir, Mr. Vance. Just ... Checking the light." "Light's fine. Check your self-rescuer. That's what keeps you breathing if the air goes bad," Silas instructed. not unkindly, but firmly. He was the section foreman. It was his job to bring these men home. They grabbed their belts, heavy with the battery packs for their cap lamps, and headed for the cage. The elevator that would take them 800 feet down. The ride down was always quiet, as the daylight disappeared above them, shrinking to a pinprick, and then vanishing. The mood shifted. The joke stopped. The men adjusted their hats, checked their lights. They were entering a hostile environment, a world where humans were intruders. The cage hit the bottom with a jarring thud. The doors rattled open, and the air hit them cool, damp, and moving fast. The massive ventilation fans on the surface pushed millions of cubic feet of air down here, but it still tasted stale. It tasted like rocks that hadn't seen the sun in 300 million years. They piled into the man-trip, a low-slung rail car that would take them 3 miles back to the working phase. The ride was rough. The tunnels, or entries, whizzed by, walls of black coal, supported by wooden cribbing and steel bolts. The ceiling was low here, maybe 5 feet. Everyone kept their heads down. Silas sat next to Tolly. The kid was vibrating. "You? Nervous?" Silas asked, barely audible over the screech of the wheels. "A little," Tully admitted. "My mom, she didn't want me to take this shift. Said she had a bad dream." Silas nodded. Mining wives and mothers always had dreams. It was how they processed the fear. "Focus on the job, son. Keep your eyes on the ribs, the walls. Watch for spalling rock. Listen to the roof. You do that, you'll be fine." Silas thought about his own wife, Martha. She didn't talk about dreams anymore. She just made sure his insurance was paid up and his dinner was warm. They had a daughter in college studying nursing in Morgantown. That tuition bill was the reason Silas was still down here, eating dust instead of retiring. He wanted her to have a job where she worked in sterile white rooms, not black pits. He wanted her hands to be clean. They reached the section. The continuous miner, a massive machine with a rotating drum of steel teeth, sat waiting like a dormant dragon. The crew dispersed, each man knowing his role. The shuttle car operators, the roof bolters, the scoop operators. Silas did his rounds, checking the gas readings. 0% of methane, the detector read. "Good. Safe. All right, boys? Let's make some dust!" Silas yelled, his voice echoing. The machine roared to life. The noise was deafening. Water sprays hissed, trying to knock down the coal dust as the teeth tore into the seam. For the next 4 hours, it was a blur of labor. Silas moved between the men, shouting orders, checking the roof. He was the conductor of this industrial symphony. He watched Tully working the cable for the miner. The kid was getting the hang of it, but he was slow. He was hesitant. Silas made a mental note to drill him on cable handling later. You couldn't be slow. Slow got you hurt, but fast got you killed. It was a balance. Around noon, they stopped for dinner, eating their sandwiches, sitting on the mine floor, leaning against the coal ribs. The darkness beyond their cap lamps was absolute. If you turned off your light, you couldn't see your hand touching your nose. It was a darkness that had weight. "Hey, Silas," one of the bolters, a giant of a man named Big Mike, chewed his apple. "You hear about that closure over in Logan? 200 guys laid off." Silas nodded, swallowing a bite of dry bread. "I heard. Sad business." "You think we're safe?" Tully asked, his eyes wide in the glow of the lamp. "Coal keeps the lights on, son," Silas said, though he wasn't as sure as he sounded. "As long as people want to flip a switch and see the TV, they need us. Don't worry about the economics. Worry about that roof bolt you missed on the number 3 entry." Tully blushed, invisible in the soot, but nodded. Silas was hard on him, but it was a protective hardness. He needed the boy to be sharp. It happened at 2:15 p.m. They were on the last cut of the shift. The continuous miner was chewing through a particularly hard section of the seam. The noise was a constant, grinding roar that vibrated in your chest. Silas was standing near the feeder breaker, about 50 yards from the face, filling out his production report. He felt it first, through his boots. The floor didn't shake. It jumped. A sharp, violent, vertical thrust. Then came the sound. It wasn't the rumble of a roof fall. It was a bump. A geological stress release, like a miniature earthquake centered right on their pillar. The coal pillar next to Silas exploded outward, spraying rock and dust like shrapnel. "Back! Get back!" Silas screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the sudden, overwhelming roar of the mountain settling. The lights went out, not the cap lamps, but the main power to the machinery. The silence that followed the crash was instantaneous and terrifying. But it wasn't quiet. It was filled with the sound of falling rock, the groaning of steel, and the choking clouds of dust that instantly filled the entry. "Sound off," Silas yelled, coughing, pulling his shirt over his nose. "Mike, Tully! I'm here!" Mike's voice boomed from the darkness to the left. "I'm good. Just bruised. Tully." Silas swung his cap lamp. The beam cut through the swirling dust like a lighthouse in fog. Silence. "Tully!" Silas scrambled forward, ignoring the falling debris. He moved toward where the boy had been standing. The entry had collapsed, a massive slab of sandstone. The kettle bottom had come down, blocking the way out. They were sealed in. "Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance." A weak voice came from under a pile of loose coal and slate. Silas dropped to his knees, clawing at the black rocks. He found an arm, then a shoulder. Tully was pinned, buried up to his waist. But the main slab had missed him by inches. It had created a lean-to, a small pocket of space. "I got you, son, I gotcha," Silas grunted, heaving rocks aside. Big Mike was there a second later, his massive strength lifting stones that two men shouldn't be able to move. They dragged Tully free. The boy was gasping, his face a mask of blood and dust. His leg was twisted at a bad angle. Broken. Badly broken. "My leg, ... Oh. Gah, my leg," Tully whimpered. "Look at me." Silas grabbed the boy's face, forcing him to look into the light. "You're alive. Do you hear me? You're alive. The leg is just a leg. We can fix a leg." Silas looked around. The way back to the man trip was gone, blocked by tons of rock. The ventilation was cut off. The air was already getting heavy, warmer. The dust hung suspended, refusing to settle. They were trapped in a space about 20 feet wide and 40 feet long. Silas checked his multi-gas detector. The numbers were flickering. Oxygen was okay for now. Methane was creeping up. "Mike," Silas whispered, pulling the big man aside. "How bad is the blockage?" Mike shone his light to the wall of rubble. "It's tight, Silas." Roof came down hard. "We ain't digging out of this with hands." "Then we wait," Silas said, his stomach tightening. "We wait for the rescue team. Time moves differently underground. There is no sun to mark the hours. There is only the battery life of your cap lamp and the rhythm of your own breathing." They moved Tully to the clearest spot, propping his back against a coal rib. Silas used his belt to splint the boy's leg, using a piece of timber for support. Tully screamed once, a sharp, jagged sound, then passed out from the pain. It was better that way. Silas and Mike sat in the dark. They turned their lamps to the lowest setting to save power. The darkness pressed in on them. "How long you think?" Mike asked. His voice was small, stripped of its usual bravado. "Shift Buzz knows we're down here," Silas said, trying to sound certain. "When we didn't call in the hourly report, they started looking. They're drilling already. I know it." But Silas knew the geology. They were 800 feet down. Drilling a rescue hole took time. Surveying took time, and they had finite air. An hour passed. Then 2. Tully woke up, moaning. He was thirsty. Silas gave him a sip of water from his thermos. "Easy, kid. Make it last." "Am I dying, Mr. Vance?" Tully whispered. "No," Silas said sternly. "You ain't dying. You're going to a barbecue next Sunday. You're going to take that girl you liked to the movies. What's her name? Sarah? Tully breathed. Right, Sarah. You're taking Sarah to the movies. Focus on that. What's she look like? Silas kept him talking. He forced the boy to describe the girl's hair, her laugh, the car he wanted to buy. It was a lifeline made of words. Around the 4th hour, the air quality changed. Silas could feel a headache starting behind his eyes, the telltale sign of bad air, or maybe just carbon dioxide building up. He checked the detector. Oxygen was dropping slowly, 19.5%. Turn off the lights, Silas ordered. Total dark. Save every spark. They sat in absolute blackness. This was the hardest part. In the dark, the mind starts to eat itself. Silas closed his eyes and saw his kitchen. He saw the coffee pot. He saw the tuition bill on the counter. He saw Martha's face. He felt a profound sense of regret, not for the job, but for the time the job had stolen. The missed birthdays. The weekends spent sleeping off the exhaustion. I promised her, Silas whispered to the dark. Promised who? Mike asked from the void. My wife. Promised her this was the last year. Said I'd retire when Janie graduated. You'll keep that promise, boss, Mike said. Then the hallucinations started. Just flickers at the edge of vision. Flashes of light that weren't there. The sound of running water. It was the lack of sensory input. The brain was inventing things to stay active. Silas. Tully's voice was weak. Slurpy. I hear them. Hear who? Son, the angels? They're singing. Silas's heart hammered. No, Tully. That ain't angels. Listen close. Listen harder. Silas pressed his ear against the coal rib. The coal was a conductor. If they were drilling, the sound would travel through the seam. At first, nothing. Just the settling of the mountain, the groaning of the earth. Then ... Thump ... Thump. Rhythmic, mechanical. Mike, Silas hissed. Grab a hammer. Hit the roof bolt. Rhythm of 3. Mike fumbled in the dark, found a scaling bar, and struck the steel bolt driven into the ceiling. Clang! 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 They waited. Thump! 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 It was louder, closer. They found us. Silas let out a breath. He felt he'd been holding for 6 hours. They know where we are. But knowing and reaching were two different things. The air was getting heavy. Silas felt dizzy. His limbs felt like lead. The methane monitor beeped a high-pitched warning. Gas was leaking in from the cracks. Masks on, Silas ordered. They pulled the self-rescuers from their belts. These devices were chemical oxygen generators. They provided about an hour of breathable air in a contaminated atmosphere. Tay very hot. They tasted like rubber and chemicals, but they were life. Silas helped Tully get his mouthpiece in, clamping the nose clip shut. Breathe slow, he instructed, his voice muffled by his own device. They sat there, 3 men breathing through rubber tubes, listening to the thump, thump, thump of the drill getting closer. It was a race. Now. The drill versus the gas, the rescuers versus the mountain. Silas drifted. He wasn't sure if he was awake or asleep. The heat in the small pocket was intense. The chemical reaction and the self-rescuer generated heat, burning his lips, but he couldn't spit it out. He thought about the canary. The old-timers used to carry birds down here. When the birds stopped singing, you ran. He was the bird now. He had to keep singing for Tully. He reached out and squeezed the boy's hand. Tully squeezed back, faintly. Suddenly, a different sound. The grinding of metal on rock, high-pitched, screeching. Then, a breakthrough. A small drill bit, no wider than a soda can, punched through the ceiling about 10 feet away. A blast of fresh, cool air hissed into the chamber. It was the most beautiful sound Silas had ever heard. He scrambled over, his legs weak. He banged on the drill steel. We are here. A voice came down the pipe. Distant, tinny, but human. "Hello! Can you hear me?" Silas spat out his mouthpiece. "Yeah, we hear you." 3 souls, 1 injured. "Bad air. Hold tight, boys." The voice from the surface said, "We're widening the hole. We're coming for you." The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. The small hole became a lifeline. They dropped water, fresh radios, medical supplies. Then the large rescue capsule drill broke through. The capsule was a narrow steel cage, barely big enough for 1 man. Tully goes first. Silas commanded. They strapped the boy in. He was weeping, partly from pain, partly from relief. "Thank you, Silas. Thank you." "Shut up and get topside." Silas grinned, his face a mask of coal and sweat. He watched the capsule disappear up the shaft. Then Mike went. Finally, Silas was alone. For a moment, he stood in the silence of the collapsed mine. He looked at the crushed continuous miner, the rock fall, the tomb that had almost claimed them. He felt a strange respect for the mountain. It had spared them this time. But it wouldn't always be this forgiving. He climbed into the capsule. He gave the signal. The cable tightened. He was lifted off the floor. The surface air smelled sweet. It smelled of grass and diesel and rain. It was nighttime again. The scene was KOX slots, ambulances, weeping families. Silas saw Martha running toward him before his feet even touched the gravel. She hit him with the force of a linebacker, burying her face in his filthy chest. She didn't care about the coal dust. "I'm okay," he whispered into her hair. "I'm okay." He saw Tully being loaded into an ambulance, his mother holding his hand. The boy gave Silas a thumbs up. Silas sat on the bumper of a rescue truck, a medic checking his blood pressure. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. He looked at the mine entrance. The black mouth of the earth. "You going back down there?" The medic asked, wrapping a cuff around his arm. Silas looked at Martha. He looked at the hills. He thought about the tuition bill. It was paid off. "Next month." "No," Silas said. And for the first time in 30 years, he knew it was the truth. "No. I think I left everything I needed to down there." He took a deep breath of the mountain air. It was cool. It was free. And for Silas Vance, it was in a woo.